welcome everyone. I recognize Trustee Harvey Hope, and I'm sorry, Oliver. Yes, pardon me. It's a long day. First up on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Can I see a mover for that, please? Diane, seconded by Melissa. Any questions or concerns on the agenda? Show of hands in favor. Any opposed? Seeing none, it is carried, and we have an agenda. Call for notices of motion reports to the board. Are there any? No? Seeing none. We'll move on to 3.1, minutes of the October 2018 meeting. I need someone to move approval of those. Thank you, Rochelle. A seconder. Dawn, thank you. Any questions or comments or changes? Yeah. Go ahead, please, Diane.
Sorry, I was trying to find them, but somewhere under the SEAC discussion, it seemed to me that the term SEAC and SEAC members and trustees were being used. Trustees were being used instead of SEAC members. It didn't make sense.
Oh. Do you know where that is?
It would be in the section called SEAC, the SEAC discussion.
Could I just ask that people please speak into their microphones?
Yes, you may. Thank you. And we shall. Sorry, we're just looking up the minutes right now, Amy.
I've got them in front of me. Which section, Diane?
When we look at section 3.4, new SEAC committee process,
Yeah.
down about the fourth line, says trustees must be Canadian citizens old enough to vote and reside and pay taxes in Halton.
Right.
Would that not be SEAC members?
Yeah. The criteria are the same, right, for being a board member and a member of SEAC as well. But yeah, in the context of what we're talking about, it should be SEAC members. So.
And then it's following, it says M. Zonefeld went into detail about the process of determining the new board of trustees and the various roles that association representatives and members at large play on the SEAC committee.
Yeah, I think both conversations went on, but yeah, I think you're right. That should be the new SEAC.
SEAC members.
Right. So yeah, we can.
There's just a couple of references there.
So we can make those amendments.
Yep.
So when you're looking for approval, it would be with those amendments.
Yeah. So just the two amendments in paragraph 3.4, replacing trustees with SEAC members and new board of trustees with new SEAC.
Yeah, new SEAC committee. Yeah, thanks for catching that, Diane.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. Any other questions or comments on the minutes?
Hello?
Yeah, just a sec, Amy.
Yes, go ahead, please, Amy.
I didn't see or couldn't hear what Diane was saying. Can someone repeat that?
What she was pointing out is that on the bottom of page 2 of the minutes, paragraph 3.4, it says trustees must be Canadian citizens, old enough to vote, where it really should say SEAC members must be Canadian citizens, old enough to vote.
Okay, thank you.
And the second one was the following sentence. M. Zonefeld went into detail about the process of determining the new board of trustees, where that should say new SEAC committee.
Okay, thanks very much.
Anything else, Amy?
No, I just wanted clarification.
Okay. All right, right, so with those two amendments, can I get a show of hands to approve? Anyone disapproving? Seeing none, so carried. So those are our minutes. Next up is 3.2, Student Trustees on SEAC update. And for that, I will turn it over to the chair.
Vice Chair.
Vice Chair. This microphone is really,
Yeah,
it keeps
is
dropping
bad.
words on me. Yeah.
Totally. So I sent out today the updated version of the students on SEAC, student representation on SEAC. So if you recall, we talked about having students representing on SEAC when we started when the next SEAC term starts in the new year. So this is something that the trustees are going to want to take to the board of trustees in order to get approved, because it has to be approved by the trustees in order to be updated in the bylaws for us to be able to have students on SEAC. So not much has changed. I made a couple of adjustments to wording that we talked about, but other than that, the rest of it remains the same. So the basic idea. Are there any questions about the document? Oh, Amy's on the.
Yes, go ahead, please, Amy.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really important to note that what Denise has put together would be what trustees would work from in order to embed the concept into our current policy. So it needs a motion from SEAC in order to be brought forward to trustees as a recommendation to be embedded in the current policy.
Yeah. Do you want me to run through it kind of as a reconfirming what we've talked about? Well, it hasn't changed that much, but I can run through it. So basically, the eligibility criteria, they have to be entering or enrolled in full-time in secondary school within the jurisdiction of the board. They have to either be an exceptional student with an IEP or a sibling of an exceptional student with an IEP. And to give you a little bit of the reasoning behind that is because we really want to have students on SEAC who understand some of the special education pieces that students go through. Be a pupil of good standing at the Halton District School Board for the entire year of his or her appointment. So what that means is they can't be suspended or any sort of thing like that, or taking a semester off or whatever. And have written consent from both their principal and their parent or guardian if they're under 18. A lot of this was taken from the student trustee policy. I just kind of adjusted it for SEAC. So in order to get representation, a call for candidate notice shall be sent to each secondary school and to the school student trustees so they know that it's happening. I had no later than December 15th because we're doing this, we need to do this for upcoming. Inviting qualified students to indicate their interest to be considered for a student representative on SEAC. Candidates must complete the following information on the nomination form. Reasons that they're seeking the position, their background, qualifications, experience, and any other pertinent information they feel would be valuable for the people making the evaluation. Then they have to obtain signatures from their parent or guardian and their school principal that constitutes formal approval of the student nomination. Then the candidates will submit their nomination to the superintendent of student services. So to the appointment of it, the candidates will be invited to an interview with the superintendent of student services and the SEAC trustees, so similar to a member-at-large process. And then once the decision is made, the student representative will be appointed by the superintendent of student services and the SEAC trustee.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So for that 4B, other members of SEAC are appointed or approved by the Board of Trustees. Is there a reason why this is different?
You know what? I think I have the wording wrong. I think it should be by the Board of Trustees. So everything else I think I just worded that wrong. So it will be appointed by the Board of Trustees. So basically, it'll do the same thing that any other member of SEAC does. It goes and it would then, well, any other member of large, it would then go to the Board of Trustees for approval, just like when an association brings forward a new name or there's a new, it would go through the trustees for approval. So the roles and responsibilities, the student will regularly attend all public SEAC meetings. They will, Amy has another question. Sorry.
Go ahead, Amy.
It's more procedural than anything. This needs to get into the hands of trustees as soon as possible, and it's going to take time after it gets to trustees to be embedded in whatever way they choose to do so in the policy. So I will be, when this comes forward to trustees, I'm going to suggest that we start using the process in spirit of what will then become part of policy, because there's no way that we'll have this in policy by December 15th.
I kind of figured that, but that was, again, trying to work with the goal of having the student representative ready at the same time that we're ready to put together our new SEAC, right?
Right. I understand that. For this first year, I'm not sure exactly how it would work. We may not agree that we should do that without having it in policy first, in which case the student trustee would not be starting at the same time as the rest of SEAC.
Okay. All right.
Maybe if I could add in it, I agree that it would be ideal for them to start at the same time as the rest of the committee. However, if trustees decide they need to hammer out more of the details and those trustees could start until, into the winter, whatever time that would be. It's a late start's better than no start.
Agreed. Right? I mean, if that's what happens, then yes. And I think the idea with this is it kind of lays out the person or the parameters of the person that we want to sit on SEAC, as opposed to saying this is how we want to do it. But this is, going to the trustees to say, here's what we're suggesting. But ultimately, the trustees are going to have to hammer it out, obviously. So, if they start later, they start later. Jason, did you have a question?
Just a change in wording for 5A.
Mm-hmm.
I think it should read, the student representative will attend all regular public SEAC meetings, as opposed to will regularly attend.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
So the student representative will operate within the policies, the Education Act, all that fun stuff. And they will bring that student perspective directly to SEAC. They will notify the superintendent of student services and the chair if they're unable to attend, the same way that it works with any member of SEAC. I think these are the important things, that the student representative will vote and it will be noted, but their vote will not count for quorum or a decision. So they can input, they can vote, but it's not going to be counted towards, not that we do a lot of voting, but it's a vote without weight, I guess you could say. And they have the right to participate in the discussion, all of that sort of thing. They cannot move a motion, but they can suggest another SEAC member to move a motion. But again, because they're not having that vote, they can't actually put that motion forward on the floor. So the one thing that we talked about is having the term of office for the student representative to be a 2-year term, since there is a bit of a learning curve when it comes on to SEAC. And that for the first year, we do a bit of a rotation where one representative will have 1 year and the other representative will have a 2 year, so that we're not losing both representatives at the same time, so that you kind of have that continuity happening. Again, these are just the suggestions and things that we had talked about throughout some of our meetings. Is there any questions? Concerns? Suggestion? You have to use your mic. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, so it's secondary students, so are we looking for because if you're saying we want 2 years and then another year, you're looking at really new high school students in grades 9 or 10.
They could be, yes. I mean, they could also be going into grade 11. But to get that continuity, that's part of the reason behind it. I mean, I understand that they're young and you have that. It's just, I think that to ask, I find, and I don't know if people will agree, that the first year is really about learning and getting up to speed, and the second year is really when they'll be able to, may have more knowledge and more experience to be able to give input. That was our logic behind it. I mean, if there's any other way that people want to do it.
No, I was just mentioning it. That, that it's going to be quite a young student in grade 9 or 10, or maybe going into grade 11.
It may be, but if you look at the criteria of being someone who has an IEP or a sibling of an IEP of a child, then they already have quite a bit of knowledge and have experienced it.
Okay.
Right? So they're able to bring that student voice because they have experienced it personally in some way.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, please, Rochelle.
So along the same line, I think that would work in their favor. And if they do decide they want to be the student rep in grade 11 or grade 12, right, I don't think they should be eliminated from that decision just because they won't be able to give 2 years moving forward.
That's a good point. I mean, I guess exceptions can be made for any student who applies in a grade 11 or grade 12 year. I don't know how you put the wording on that, but it's a good.
Because when you look at the at-large SEAC members, they're only given a year, right? Like all the, yourself, Jason.
No.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
It's just I think the reps as well have.
Everybody is a 4-year term.
Yeah, I think the reps also have like a 4-year term or,
Yeah.
or the alternatives. And
Yeah, it's a 4-year term.
I just think it's too long of a commitment to expect. And if you're asking for that criteria of having some experience, then, they're already ahead of the game by having that experience.
Okay.
Melissa, go ahead.
I was just suggesting that maybe you would have one person be the main one year, and then there'd be almost an apprentice, so that that learning curve didn't have to take place. Like, it would seem that you'd have a productive member every other year if you did it every 2 years, and if you couldn't sort of have, is it reserved to just one, or could you have one and then like a sort of like an apprentice spending that year learning, and then the next year when they take over, they would, I don't know.
There is 2 students that we're looking at putting on. So it isn't just one. There are 2 students that we're looking at putting on. And that was the idea with the first year staggering, that one doing a 1 year, one doing a 2 year. So the one who's doing a 2 year kind of becomes that. But yeah, can you hear that? I mean, again, I'm open to changing it. If we want to change it to a 1-year term, then we change it to a 1-year term. Like I said, this was based on our discussion. And if we think we need to change that, then that's fine.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that if I recall, was my idea. And if it goes badly, then it was someone else's. But if we had people come in for a year, then regardless of how well they did, then it's new people the next year, and they're always facing that learning curve of learning the terminology, learning the people, learning the process. And so the idea is to have 2 serving overlapping terms so that one can be a bit of a mentor to the new one coming in, and they pass that knowledge along. That was really the intent behind it. But I do realize it's going to be difficult to find people to take that first 2-year term, no matter how you do it, right? But anyway, you had something, Mark?
I have to think this through a little bit, but maybe it's a different approach, trying to get at the same end result, would be a 1-year term with a possible 1-year extension, so that they apply knowing that they could reapply after a year, gives that in. And for some students, they might say, wow, this was a big commitment and a year is all I can handle. They could have the potential to reapply for a second, and then we have to think about that process, whether it's whether they just notify the the trustees and myself that they would like to continue and that's considered or not. There'll be a process for that. The current student trustees run for re-election to come back if they're not in grade 12. So that's a process they do. They're chosen by their student senate peers, and they can choose to run again or not. So it's kind of a similar process. I don't know, just a thought that could generate that same end result of possible them continuing for 2 years.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Amy.
Thanks. Yes, I appreciate the discussion, and I know that it's not the first time it's come to us to discuss at the table. I do want to remind people, though, that we don't have to hammer out the details of what is going to ultimately be formed into policy at the SEAC level. At SEAC, we bring our recommendation to the trustees, and then the trustees will hammer out the details. So I think what has been brought forth is supposed to be a framework of what SEAC would like. I don't think we need to get bogged down in the details too heavily, because that's part of the trustees' job.
Fair enough. So I guess my main question, just not that I want to bog down in the details, but are we comfortable with 2-year terms, or do we want to move it to 1-year term as a recommendation coming from SEAC? Or a 1-year renewable like Mark is stating? I guess those are the 3 options. Diane's come in. Yeah.
No, we're comfortable with the 2-year term.
Veer said 2-year term you're comfortable with? Yeah.
So Amy, you probably, I don't know if you're watching, but most everyone's nodding their head to a 2-year term.
Rochelle is in there as well as the next speaker.
I was just going to say that just because you put it as a 2-year term doesn't mean it'll remain as a 2-year term once it goes to the trustees.
Yeah, I'm just saying I would like to have in paper our recommendation going forward, and yes, the trustees will hammer it out. But if we're comfortable, then I'll leave it as a 2-year term in our recommendation going forward, knowing that, yes, the trustees may hammer out something a little different. Again, I think it's the spirit of having a student voice on SEAC that we're looking for more than anything. How that ultimately turns out is really, like Amy said, getting into some of the detail of the policy. We just want to have a student voice here. So then, I guess, do I make a motion to have our trustees bring this forward to the Board of Trustees to be put into policy? Is that what I have to do?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Amy. So I make that motion. No one's going to second it. Everybody's saying no.
Are there
I did.
are there 2 trustees present at the meeting?
Between you and Rochelle, yeah.
Okay, then I'll second it. I thought Leah was there.
Oh, no, Leah's not there.
Okay, I'll second it.
Thank you, Amy. Is there any more discussion needed? All those do you want to call for the vote?
I think I'm supposed to, right?
I think you are.
So I will call for a vote at this point. We'll get this figured out eventually.
Yes.
So a show of hands in approval. Any disapproving? Seeing none, so that's carried unanimously. So we will write that up as a formal motion to the Board of Trustees and get that on its way. Thanks for your guidance on that, Amy.
No worries.
Yay. Sorry. I think it's a good idea. I'm very excited.
No, it is. It's a great idea. Next up is 3.3, reflections, the past 4 years and orientation for the new committee. We don't have a slideshow or a montage or anything like that. Yeah, I thought about it, but then I
Act it out.
yeah, but instead we're going to pantomime it back in the gallery. So what we thought we'd do is just break up into a couple of groups. We've got 2 tables, and just make some notes on what I think are probably the top 5 items that would be of value to ourselves in reflection and to the new people coming in. What do you wish you knew 4 years ago that you know now? What sort of information would have been that you've learned over the last 4 years would have been really helpful to know on day 1? So that's question 1. Any direct advice for incoming SEAC? What could SEAC have done better? And out of the training and information sessions we had primarily from Mark's staff, which ones were good? Which ones would you have liked to see more of, that kind of thing? Because I find, at least that for many of us, that's an important way to gain an understanding of what various, PSPs and so on are doing out there, what itinerants are doing, the IRP process. And so if you have suggestions around that, that'd be great. And your own personal highlight for what you thought was your biggest win or achievement or learning, whatever you enjoyed most over the last 4 years. Or depending on when you started, it may be less than that. So we're going to take 20 minutes on that, which will bring us to the big hand on the 10th. So we'll all meet in the back and do it from there. Well, everyone, thank you for participating in that exercise. I read everyone's comments. They look really, really good, and I think they'll be helpful for our next session. So up next is 3.4, new SEAC committee process, and Mark will be taking us through that, mainly going over the dates and so on. So I will hand it over to him.
Thanks, Jason. So we talked about process last time, so I don't think we're necessarily going to review that. But we did, since our last meeting, we did finalize some dates. So what you've got there is a letter for each association about submission of names to be the rep and alternate for each of your associations, with that being at the end of this month. So still 3.5 weeks or so to submit that, almost 4 weeks for those groups. Also, at the same time, we have an ad going out in the media this week, I think. So that should be out this week with a deadline as well. Yeah, I've got
deadlines, yeah, 2 different ones. There's a one for organizations, is
right.
November 23rd, and members at large, November 30th.
So we have this as well for members at large, just to apply as well. And then the intent is that with the names coming in before the end of the month, that in early December, the trustees will decide on their reps for SEAC as well, and then those reps will work with me to go through the applications for members at large and do a process like we've done in the past, where it's basically like a job interview process of screening applications, deciding on interviews, and then a selection process. And so those names would come forward with the association names at the same time, going to the trustee meeting, the intent being that they go to the trustee meeting in January. So I'm not sure if it'll be the first meeting or second meeting, but the names would go forward then. If they're going to follow, often the trustees will allow for the nomination of names, and then they would, their past practice, and don't want to speak for trustees, but their past practice has been to approve names the same night. And that's a waiving of the rules, because most items that come forward to the board are presented at the one board meeting, and then 2 weeks later they're voted on. So sometimes the rules are waived, and sometimes happens with nominations for SEAC. So once again, I'm not sure whether or not it would go in the first meeting in January or the second, but the intent is that process is finished before the winter break. And then we have planned our orientation date, which I believe we set before, for the end of January. So that's what our process and dates look like. So any questions from anyone?
What was the date for the member at large? I didn't catch it.
It's the end of the month.
November 30th,
Yeah.
for members.
Yeah, November 30th. So those applications come into Lorna, right? Applications come into Lorna.
Send that out too, if you like.
Yeah, we can send you an email of the press release. We can send this out to everyone as well, if you'd like to see that. Any other questions? Sophia? Yeah, we have to have an official nomination from your association, right? So usually it comes from, most of you have a president of your association. That's the normal process, is that the nominations come from your president, indicating that you are the reps there. Just a straightforward letter, email is fine. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, go ahead, please, Amy.
Hi, thanks. I was just wondering if that will be posted on our Facebook page.
We will check with, we've been working with the media department on doing this, so we'll check with them if that's what they're going to do.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And as a follow-up question, is it on the board website?
Yeah, we'll confirm that if it's posted there as well.
Okay, thank you.
We're trying to, make it as well known as possible.
Amy, did you have another question on that? Amy, can you hear me?
No, I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions or comments for Mark on that? So the short version is November 30th is the application deadline. So, and probably for most of you in associations, they probably have the letter from last time. So it's probably not much more involved in changing the date and the name and resending it, right? And for anyone interested in the member at large position, it is a little bit like a job interview. So write your letter of application along those lines, laying out what experience you have, how it would apply at SEAC, and so on, right? Okay, moving on to 4.0, questions from the public. I'm not seeing any. Not even a whole lot of public out there, I don't think. Oh, sorry, yeah. Next up is SEAC discussion and question period. Although I did not put it on the agenda as a specific voting item, Lorna did circulate a draft letter that I had prepared to go to the incoming chair and new trustee board. I did receive one comment, and that change has been made. I didn't really hear from too many people, so I just wanted to get an idea of what everyone thought on this. Were there any other changes suggested at this point? No? Okay. So just so you understand what the intent of this letter is, we're looking at some new trustees coming in, and one of the first things that the trustees will be doing is selecting new representatives for SEAC. So I just wanted to put in front of them some guidelines on what SEAC would like to see in a trustee rep for our next session. Simply because our trustees are our voice at the trustee table, and obviously we need that the people in that role or roles, are going to be our advocates at the board table. So, I guess next up is a motion to formalize this letter and then send it off in the next probably week or so to the incoming chair and trustees. But I see Amy's on the list, so go ahead, please, Amy.
Yes, I just wanted to make a caution. This letter could be seen to be inflammatory. And the purpose of SEAC is to provide advice on the programs and services. It's not to direct trustees. And so I'm a little bit concerned that this letter will not be well received.
Okay, could you elucidate further on how you see where this is, we're, by this letter, trying to instruct the trustees on how to act, if that's what you mean?
Membership on SEAC should not just happen because someone has a child with a special need. Trustees oftentimes learn by being on SEAC. The presumption is that a trustee without an exceptional child might not understand the role. And I'm concerned because that should not be a factor.
Well, it is why I specifically created two lists, right? One of primary criteria and secondary. And that one is a secondary criteria. And that's why I also conditioned that further by saying ideally is a parent or guardian of a child with special needs. I'm not trying to say it's a required attribute of that person. Just it would be, all other factors equal. I think that would give preference to a candidate that did have exposure to a child with special needs and understands a bit of what is required of a parent in that situation.
I would disagree. I think you want to have trustees who are interested in special education and want to learn.
Yeah, but I think that's really what the first 4 or 5 criteria get to, right? Willingness to play an active role, right? As willing to learn the struggles our families experience. So I see what you're saying, Amy, but I don't quite see it as an inflammatory thing. It's just another way of saying that we want someone who's going to be willing to take the time to learn or already knows the issues that parents and guardians with children of special needs face.
I guess what I'm saying, there are several committees, and the trustees oftentimes choose things that they're not familiar with so that they can learn. It's a good thing. And so asking for trustees who are willing to spend the time for a job that barely pays for us to do the job is a little bit of an insult. Trustees put a lot of time in.
Yeah, no, that's understood. And I'm not even suggesting that these be mandatory, just guidelines for what we on SEAC think the ideal candidate would be. The trustees don't have to agree with it. But I mean, it's, as I said originally, I'm looking at this almost like a job posting. If you're looking to hire an accountant, ideally you'd want someone who's got experience with accounting and has some education in it, with the understanding that they need to learn their way into the job.
Trustees have already seen this letter. It was sent to trustees when it was sent to SEAC.
Oh, well, I was not aware of that.
And the other thing is, normally you would have a motion passed to write a letter, not write a letter and then ask for a motion.
Yeah, understood. We're just facing a deadline here, right?
Well, I won't be supporting this.
Okay, fair enough. I'll move on to Sophia then, please.
I was going to say I was really happy when I saw this letter. And I was, to be honest, surprised that it hasn't been in place in the past. You would assume when you're going to be a part of an organization like SEAC, a committee like SEAC, where the impact is so great and the voice of the trustees is so powerful, that the trustees coming in have an interest and a willingness to learn. And I think that it is quite clear in the letter, the willingness to learn. So I don't see a problem with. In fact, I fully support this, and I was really happy to see that you had taken the time to put this letter together.
Good, thank you. Next, Diane Vandenbosch.
I also wanted to comment that at LDAH we support the letter and make a comment that Jason wrote the letter at the request of several SEAC members, and he is reiterating our comments to him.
Thank you, Diane. I guess I understand some of the points that Amy is making, but the whole basis for this letter is not to be accusatory and inflammatory or in any way try to diminish the role of what trustees do. But what I've come to the stark realization over the last while is that nothing we do on SEAC matters in the larger sense in terms of strategic change or having a direct effect on the education programs and services delivered to students without the support of our trustees, which is why I'm suggesting that these criteria be looked at when picking a new trustee rep for SEAC. Because if we remain silent on this, then how do we improve the situation? How do we make sure that we have the support that we would like to get from our trustees? And I did not know that this went to the trustees in its draft form, so we'll deal with that when we get to it. Go ahead, Denise.
So I agree with Jason. I think that when you, and Amy, I understand none of us on SEAC get paid. We are all volunteers. We are putting in time as well to advocate for students with special education needs. And all we're asking is that our voice at the trustee table have that same passion and advocacy, because there's been some instances this year where the advocacy hasn't been as strong as it has been in the past. And I think what we're trying to do is to say, we as SEAC, this is something we'd like the trustees to consider. I didn't think of it as inflammatory. I thought of it strictly as, here's our thoughts. We're an advisory committee. Here is some advice, or some solicited or no, some of our thoughts and opinions. And it's what we're trying to do is to make sure that the advocacy at the board table is strong for our students. To make sure that, you know, some of the great programs that have been started are continued, but that we don't lose programs that are great as well. So I see this strictly as SEAC coming to the table to say, we'd like you to listen to what we have to say, because these trustees, that we have to work with them, and we have to work together and collaborate. And so that's the way I viewed it. I didn't view it as inflammatory. I've just read it again, and I'm not seeing, I guess I'm just taking it from a different perspective. I'm taking it from the perspective of, here, we're giving you some advice. You can take it, you can leave it. It's, as you've said, everything we send as a motion can get changed by the trustees. We don't have that power. All we have the power is to say, here's our thoughts, here's our opinions. I'm done.
So just to try to bring this back full circle then, if I may ask Trustee Collard, what would you change in this to make it more palatable to how you think the trustees would view it, and still get our concerns about getting the right trustee representatives on SEAC explained to the board? Since we have no input into the selection process, it just, the people get assigned to our committee. So how would you suggest this be done any differently?
So now that they've already seen the letter, I don't think there's anything you can do. I would have preferred that there had been some requested input. You said that there were some members that came to you. I wasn't consulted. I don't know who was consulted. And to bring it now to SEAC, it just feels like it was done backwards.
Honestly, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. You're saying we should have gone to the trustees first to ask them what we need?
No, you should have come to SEAC and said, I'd like to write a letter. Who would like to work on it? Who would like to give input?
We did all that, Amy. We did it by email.
I wasn't on that email.
Well, okay. Then I'm not entirely sure how you got some communication, but not all. Anyway, I have another speaker up. Excuse me. Over to you, Diane.
Amy, I just want to correct one, I think, misperception. Jason did not go to the SEAC members and ask about sending this letter. SEAC members came to Jason individually, privately, and talked to him about our various concerns. And out of that, all those consultations that were individual and private, came the idea to send a letter. And by the way, I'm not here because I have an exceptional child. I'm here because I represent exceptional children.
Rochelle, go ahead.
So I just want to explain the process of being picked to be on various committees. When you are elected and they have our first meeting, you submit your choices for what committees you want to be on. And from the number of people that sign up for various committees, they make a decision. But we never know how many people have decided to be on whatever committees there are. So for SEAC, they may have only had 4 people who wanted to be on SEAC, and they'll go with those 4 people. So I'm not really sure where this criteria would fit into the decision-making of who gets to be on SEAC.
So I think that it could be something for each trustee to consider themselves as they're filling out their information, as they're filling out what committees they want to sit on. And I think to say that you need to be a guardian and a parent of a child with special education needs might be taking a little far, but that would be great, but that isn't always possible. But I think that if each trustee thinks about their strengths and weaknesses and how they can help when it looks at special education students under the special education umbrella, maybe that's where the criteria comes into play, right? Maybe it's not a set criteria that the Board of Trustees use, but rather something that the trustees can consider when they're thinking about what committees they want to sign up for. Again, I think that if you look at it in terms of it is our opinion, our thoughts on this, that's the way it should be taken, not as a direction of this is what the trustees should do, because you're right, we don't have that power to do that. All we have the power to do is express an opinion and to give advice.
Yeah, go ahead, Rochelle.
And you do have a right to voice that opinion. You just have to remember that there's no guarantee that that's going to be fulfilled. So, okay.
Okay, so I got to jump in here. Have people actually read this, or are they looking at the headline and assuming what the content is? Nowhere in here have I said must be, has to be, is required to. I respectfully request the following criteria be considered by the selection committee, and I listed them. So I spent a lot of time trying to write this in the most polite and suggestive way possible, and if it's not being interpreted that way, then I can rewrite it. If there's only 4 people out of the trustees that apply to go on SEAC, well, then this means nothing. But as Denise said, hey, if the people read this and see, well, this is really kind of what's expected of a trustee rep on SEAC, and I want to do it, that's great. Then it served its purpose. If someone reads it, disagrees with it, and still wants to be a SEAC rep, I've got no say in that. So I really don't see how this has become in any way an inflammatory issue. But obviously, this has gone far out into the weeds on that. So I don't know. Are there any other questions at this point that's not just a simple reiteration? Sorry, Michelle, you're still on the speakers list. Did you have another point? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, just didn't change it. There you go. I would just put the motion on the floor and call the question if people are going to support it or not.
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Call the question.
Is that I think that we should put a motion for us
People
to
are either gonna
determine
support it
whether or not, because I don't know who didn't get the letter. I got the letter.
Mm-hmm.
And, I looked at it and there wasn't anything in the letter that I thought was not helpful in making a decision. And perhaps somewhere we can add that this is not a criteria, this list is a suggestion or something to that effect that won't put people's noses out of joint, because of course we want as many trustees to be interested in our committee. But I also hear, what we as a SEAC committee are saying is that these are the criteria that we look for. Whether or not we get that is something completely different.
Sure, and that's simply part of what I'm trying to address, right? SEAC as a whole is the voice of approximately 18% of the students within the system. We have no direct vote. The only way we can make any significant changes in how things are done is by getting a motion to the trustee table. And the only way that's going to happen is with support of the trustee reps on SEAC. So all I'm asking for in plain language here is when you're considering new reps for SEAC, please consider putting in representatives that are going to support what we do, or at least take the time to listen and learn. They don't have to support everything we ask for, but they've got to understand the issues, and they've got to be able to follow what we're talking about, is really what it comes down to. So at this point, I'd like to raise a motion, or whatever the term is at this point.
You're going to put a motion on the floor.
We'll put a motion on the floor to vote that we submit this letter to the incoming chair and trustees. So can I see a show of hands? Yes?
We need a seconder first.
Oh, pardon me. Yeah.
Diane is seconding it.
Diane? So a show of hands in favor? Any opposed?
Yes.
Okay. So still carried. Thank you. Next up on the agenda, 6.0, communication to SEAC, is the superintendent's report. So that's over to you, Mark. Oh, yeah, go ahead, please.
Just, I did see the swimming issue was discussed briefly, that we were notified at CI. I wasn't here, so my apologies if I'm repeating anything. But I've never had as many emails from members as I did about the swimming cancellation. What they want to know is, do we have any details about, was this triggered by a specific event, the canceling of the swimming? And what's the plan? What's happening in its place? Just some more specifics, because I did get a copy of the letter, and it's a sort of quite general. And so I've never had this many questions. I need to go back with some more content for them.
Sure. So you're referencing the decision to put the swimming programs on hold as opposed to a cancellation. And this is specific for life skills and CPP classes. And that decision is twofold. One is that the phys ed safety guidelines that are created and shared by OFIA. OFIA is the Ontario Physical Health and Education Association, and that organization sets the guidelines for physical education activities for all school boards for the province. And they touch on everything from what activities are appropriate for different grades, to the level of supervision that should be in place, the proper equipment, the training of staff, the proper facilities, etc. All those types of things are outlined in the AFIA guidelines. So those guidelines were revised last year and over the summer and came to boards this fall, largely in response to the tragedy that happened with a student from TDSB approximately a year and a half ago. So those revised guidelines required us to look at our practices, as all boards should be doing in terms of their swim programs, to ensure that we're doing all the things we need to keep our students and staff safe. So that was one. Also, it was us, even before those guidelines came out revised.
So was there anything in the guidelines that sort of affected the swim? Because the TDSB incident was different from the pool that the kids are going to here. So I'm wondering, the OFIA, I haven't seen the changes, but were there changes that directly impacted or would have affected something with our supervision or our numbers of those children in those programs? So specifically?
Right. So it's tied to my second comment. So even before those guidelines were revised, we were looking at our own practices, because questions were coming up through our revision of our managing violent aggressive behavior admin procedure. I did share that with SEAC last spring, that we had revised that admin procedure and that we have been training our staff in that procedure all last spring and into this fall as well. So through that revision process, we have then been looking at our practices in all aspects of our programming. So, for example, if we said, okay, we need to have a safety plan in place for a student, and we need to communicate that plan well to staff, train them appropriately in how to support that student, practice the skills required, and to do that in a variety of settings, whether that be in the classroom, in the hallway, on the way to the bus, etc. That then got us really thinking about, are we really well prepared to support students in all settings that we have them participate in program? And that includes field trips, walks in the community, co-op opportunities, etc. So we've been looking at that across a variety of these locations and programs, and including swimming. So when we looked at the swimming opportunities that we provide, lots of questions came up about how well we can support students to be safe, other students to be safe, staff to be safe, patrons and the other patrons in the school to be safe, in the pool to be safe. And as we looked at that, we said, there are some things here that we really need to closely examine. And then during those conversations, along came the OFIA revisions. So we said, okay, here's some clear guidelines around swimming protocols that also will feed these discussions. And that's when we said, we need the time to do this right. And we can't, in good conscience, when we know there are some gaps there, especially around people's safety, we can't in good conscience say, continue to swim when we have these safety concerns. So that's what drove the decision to say, it's not a cancellation, it's a putting those programs on hold while we do this work.
A few members had emailed me and said, apparently there's rumors in the community that an incident took place and another patron in the pool was hurt by one of the kids in a program, and thus, the school board canceled the program for everybody, which is so inequitable. So families are really upset, and I think there's lots of different stories that are circling, and so like I said, I've never received this many emails as I did about this issue. And so, parents are saying, this is the one thing my kid looks forward to all month, and now it's canceled, and we feel like it's really unfair, and because one incident is now affecting all of us, and it's not like they're canceling swimming for, like, the grade 3 program is still happening. So, there's still access to swimming for other kids. So why are the children in life skills and community pathways being penalized for one incident? So just some clarity around that.
So I have talked to, I think, two or three parents as well, with similar concerns, asking about really advocating, saying, how important this is to their son or daughter, right? That this is, the highlight of their week, their program, their year, that they don't have this opportunity, through either through home, because the parents can't make this happen for them, or through other organizations. So we get that, and we've had lots of discussions about the benefits of the swimming opportunity for our students in those programs, knowing that it meets a number of physical needs of our students in terms of mobility and therapy and those kinds of things. Students with sensory needs, it can meet a number of those needs as well. Life, as a life skill, like we can go on, right? There's a long list. So we get the benefits. But when we looked at the safety side of it, we said we need to make sure we're not putting anybody at risk. So I hope that people can appreciate that this is not meant as to take away something that's of a great benefit to our kids, or to that we're doing it not appreciating the value. It's putting safety first. So I hope that people can appreciate that.
And can I take back a timeline roughly? What are we looking at? How long is the pause going to be?
I'd love to say I've got one for you. I don't. I've been having discussions with staff this week. There's been a working group looking at the various pieces of this. So I don't yet. Maybe if I can get, I'm not sure if I can get one to you. We have talked about doing a bit of a pilot of some of the things that we're working on, with at least one life skills class and one CPP class, because there are some things that we're asking staff to do differently that they haven't before. And so we want to make sure we've tried it out and said, is this doable or not? Is this accomplishing what we've set out? So I don't have a date on that yet, but maybe I can get back to you with that when I have, I'm able to say that. Fair enough? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Sophia.
I did want to follow up about the ATRT assistive device camp that we talked about. We were going to discuss that. You were going to get back to us at this meeting today about the possibility of running that this summer, opening it up and being more inclusive.
Yeah, so we've been doing some email about that in terms of and your question was about providing additional.
I think you misunderstood my question. It wasn't the support for the families. It was the, allowing more students that have SIA claims to come to those camps, because previously many parents were told that if your child requires an EA or any type of support, they're not eligible, which seems counterproductive. I think you were going to go back and look at the possibility of opening it up.
So we have been talking about that, and we're a little, challenged initially trying to understand where that came from, because that isn't a message that we've sent to schools. However, there may have been some interpretation on the part of staff to say, here's what happens at the AT camps, and therefore... Yeah,
it was the contact person that was listed on the camp flyer. Because when I heard about it, I told all of our members, guys, it's a great camp if your kids have it. And then people were calling the contact number, and the secretary, whoever was in charge of that, was denying families and saying, oh, no, sorry, your child requires an EA, they're not eligible.
Okay, well, I'll certainly go back and check that, because I have talked with the staff that have led that work, and they said, we're not sure where this is coming from. So obviously there's some misunderstanding within our department then if that's what's happening. There is, we do partner with an external provider that does, that bring in, we've talked about Bridges is a provider that comes in and brings that camp experience for our kids. So thanks for that. I need to hear that because I'll dig into that further. So we have, I've asked staff to talk about, to look into, so who exactly are we serving, what needs do they bring, and what supports do we need to put in place to make sure all students are able to participate. Are there any costs associated with that? How does that fit, etc. So that work is going on because we met with staff about that. I'm looking at John 2 weeks ago, I think. Last week, thank you. So,
we were talking about our September meeting and that lady that was the EA representative for their union or group. Do you remember? I don't know, she came up to us and said, oh, we'd be happy to volunteer in that too. I have lots of EAs that would be willing to work. So I think that there's a lot of, people want it to happen and the support's there, but I think, I'm just hoping you can put a timeline on this, because if we want it to happen this summer, then budgets and planning and all that stuff has to happen now.
Yeah.
If you could. Sorry, I just have a lot of families that were really interested, and I felt like I let them down because I said, yeah, sign your kids up, and they were all denied. So I feel almost responsible, and I need to be accessible.
That's fair enough. So we're doing this work, and we will bring it back.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Diane?
Yes, I have two. One is a request and the other is a question. So my request is, could a copy of the October report be sent to SEAC members? The October report 2018.
You're talking about
October 31st report?
The report to the ministry in terms,
in
terms of enrollment.
Yes.
And
exceptionalities, etc.
So I haven't seen that report in years. But
I saw it last year.
I think you're asking about a very specific portion of it.
And then I'm asking for the portion of it that has the exceptionalities listed.
Okay.
And the number of IEPs.
Because it's a massive.
Yeah. Okay. So
data
the
submission.
Exceptionalities. How many students in the board are under each exceptionality, and how many IEPs are there?
Right.
For identified and unidentified.
Yes.
Okay. So we are requesting a copy of that. And my question is, out of last year's report, when there was close to 1,600 students with non-identified IEPs, I questioned why that was happening. And I guess out of that came, are parents choosing not to go to IPRC? And I guess the parents that I'm talking to are being talked out of going to IPRC. So I'm just wondering where we are with that.
So when you say where we are, can you give me a little bit more of your...
Do we know what the message is that's going from the school to the parents? When the parents are requesting an IPRC, are they getting that IPRC without any questions? Or are they being told you really don't need to go to IPRC because it's not going to change anything, etc.? So on one side, we've got the question, why are parents choosing not to go to IPRC? And I'm questioning, what is the message that is coming to the parents when they're questioning or when they're asking about going to IPRC?
So we ask staff to have a discussion with parents, right? It's not just a black and white answer, but have a discussion with parents about the needs of their child and the benefits of an identification, because you have parents coming to that conversation with a range of feelings, perspectives about that. So we're looking for the best outcome to the benefit of that student, right? We have, I know you've had many conversations with parents, Diane, and you have a range of parents who come to that conversation saying, I don't want to even talk about a possible identification or labeling of my child. Like there's parents who really don't want to talk about or anything exceptional, different programming, nothing. And we have parents that want a great deal of support for their child, sometimes more than is beneficial in terms of that child's. And then we have everything in between, right? We have a real range of what that looks like. So school staff, whether that be the teacher or the CERT or the principal, are coming to that conversation with that parent, really trying to understand their perspective and what are the needs of that student, and arrive at the spot where you can get the most benefit for that student. Sometimes you're trying to move the parent more along that perspective of more support, and maybe an identification comes with that if it's appropriate. Sometimes parents are asking for a great deal more than is necessary, and you're trying to bring them the other way. And sometimes it's an easy conversation because everyone's sort of on the same page. So it's not a black and white answer of where that goes. There's no direction from us as student services to dissuade people from identification, right? We're not trying to say you shouldn't identify, nor are we pushing for it the other way. We're looking at what action will derive the most benefit for that student. And that's working with the family in that discussion. So I know that's a longer answer, but it's so individual. As you know, it's so individual for every family, that discussion. So yes, we certainly can share the October 31st numbers.
Okay, I think that brings us to 6.2, association reports. Do we have any this evening?
Do the 6.1 superintendent's report. He talked a lot, but he didn't actually do his report yet.
I just had more questions from the.
Okay.
We were still back on 5.0.
Yeah.
5.0.
We were here. He didn't do this yet.
Well, I'm pretty sure I did. But anyway, okay. Yeah, we're not getting out of here early tonight, are we? All right. So we're done with discussion and question period, I'm assuming, and we can go on to superintendent's report. Try to keep up if you can. It's difficult, I know.
I can take a hint. Mark, talk less. So I apologize for sending my report a bit late. It came earlier today, and I got 3 quick items because I knew this was intended to be a short meeting. So one was about a new mental health strategy resource that we've developed about everyday well-being activities for students in secondary. This is a great resource that's being well used with amongst secondary teachers, and it's meant to be quick and fast ideas that they can reference. They can sort in different ways and say they're looking for activities around inclusion or around student voice or wellness, etc., and they can draw upon those resources and decide how to insert those into their regular classroom programs. So just sharing some of the work that's going on, and maybe it's a bit of a warm-up because we're planning on our agenda item. I'm sort of doing this in advance because we won't have a chair selected yet, but Jason and Denise and I were thinking that a refresher on our mental health strategy would be a great first agenda item for the new SEAC in February. So I've asked our mental health lead, Michelle Bates, to come and speak as the first presenter at the February meeting. Second item is around our external agency partnerships, and these are partnerships that we've had in place in most cases for many years. These are agencies that partner with us in delivering program and support to our students in schools. So you can see some of our partner agencies there, and the sort of continuing work that we're going to be doing with them. We've had agreements with them in place once again for years to ensure we're really clear, what's that agency bringing, what's the board's responsibility, things like, do we make sure that, all their staff have police checks, et cetera, et cetera. We're really clear on what that is and who's doing what work. We're going to be moving that over into memorandums of understanding, so a little more formalized agreements between the agencies and the board. And that's part of the ministry's expectations around our work with those partner agencies. So just sharing that. And then my last item is just sort of highlighting. We had Temple Grandin in the board last week. I don't know if any of you had a chance to hear her speak, but yeah, if you didn't get a chance, you want to see her on YouTube. She does a great TED Talk there, and so she was here last week. But it was a real focus on how to utilize the talents and skills of our students and members of the community that have disabilities, and so really focusing on the abilities of those individuals instead of looking at it from a disability lens, and how can we create opportunities for them to be employable and employed, and to bring that both to our schools in terms of the preparation we do of our students for employment, but also to families and employers about how and why the benefits of employing our students and young adults with some of those needs, and how there'd be a great benefit in their workplace. So I had the opportunity to be part of some of that work last week. It's really exciting work. So those are my 3 report items this week, and I'd be happy to take any questions, or we can move on, since I know you want to hear me speak less.
Denise has a question for you, Mark.
Wasn't it the Autism Job Club that brought them, not Autism Life Path?
I wish I had the bag here, because it has both. I'll say I guess so, because the Autism Job Club, both are headed up by Marilyn Ellis.
Yep.
If you know Marilyn.
I do.
And so maybe I've got the 2, because she's now associated with Autism Life Path as well. So I'm not sure if she's drawing her corporate name or whatever over to that, but I guess it's a larger organization,
Okay.
Autism Life Path.
Okay.
But both names I saw on
the farm.
on
Because I thought
material last week.
a lot of her focus was on employing people with autism, and that was why the link with the Autism Job Club, because the Autism Job Club works with adults on the spectrum to help them prepare for interviews and to get that life skill of getting a job and maintaining a job. So that's why I thought it was them, but it doesn't really matter. I just thought for clarity.
Yeah, and she's broadened her scope. That's not just students and adults with autism, but more broadly with disabilities, and the benefits for everyone of providing employment opportunities.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Next is 6.2, association reports. Do we have any this week? Diane, go ahead, please.
Just a reminder to everyone that the annual Solutions for Learning Conference, and our theme this year next year is Breakthrough to Excellence. It's on March 21st, 2019. As it's turned out, lining up all the speakers, we have a fairly heavy math emphasis this year. We have Dr. Sue Ball and Janine Franklin from York Region District School Board, Understanding Learning Disabilities and How Processing Affects Math Learning. And they're doing the keynote as well as one of the breakout sessions. We have a a student from OISE doing her doctoral on activated learning using executive functioning to reinvigorate self-regulated learning in instruction, assessment, and feedback. We have our own Stacy Faulkner and her tech dudes from the self-contained classroom presenting how they use technology in their classroom, and the students will be there to help Stacy present that. We have several teachers from Trillium, Provincial Demonstration School, one with supporting students with learning disabilities in the math classroom, and another improving numeracy skills through the use of infographics. And we also have a certified dyslexia therapist talking about phonological awareness and incorporating multisensory instruction. Dr. John McNamara from Brock University is going to talk about the Reading Rocks program that we run for students in the evening in Halton. But they also have incorporated using therapy dogs in their Reading Rocks program in Niagara. So he's going to be talking about that. And we have a session on transitions. And we have a curriculum consultant from Mohawk College is going to be talking about universal design for learning in the classroom and how she's incorporating that at Mohawk in the classroom at the college, and how we could bring it down to the secondary or the elementary level. So that is March 22nd or 21st, 2019, and there's something for everyone. Parents, teachers, consultants, superintendents. The director usually comes at least part-time. Yes, and our itinerant instructions. So that's it. March 21st, 2019. Flyers will be out shortly and registration will be open this week.
Great, thank you, Diane. Any other association reports? No. Trustee reports, Rochelle or Amy?
Thank you. As you all are probably aware, a new board of trustees will be sworn in at the beginning of December. And as far as our meeting, we have 2 more meetings of this board, tomorrow night and the 21st. So tomorrow we will be looking at the policy feedback for the operational leadership and the fundraising policy, where we will also be reviewing for information options for solar installations, the promoting of a public confidence committee that was formed in March of 2018, and also financial statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Amy, did you have a report for us?
No, that covers it.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then to committees and other reports. Do we have anything from PIC?
So the conference was held last month, and it was a great success. Some of the workshops that were recorded will be online. They're not online just yet. It was a really good conference, and definitely Garth Webb is a phenomenal place to hold a conference. Much better, much more conducive than some of the other schools. Although I know we need to move them around. And I wanted to thank Lou for helping at the SEAC table. Thanks, Lou.
Yes, thank you, Lou. Very appreciated. Next, Accessibility and Coordinating Committee. I'm not even sure who's on that, quite honestly.
Trustee Harvey Hope is on that.
Oh. Do you have a report or anything you could give us this evening?
Piece that's really interesting is that when we asked them about the accessibility of the front door, the door between the reception hall and the main part of the office, somebody came out and looked at it, and they'd have to take the whole thing apart and rebuild the wall. So that's an example of the accessibility issues we have in this particular building. But no, they've been doing all their different pieces, and the work is on schedule, and everything seems to be going smoothly. So I can probably actually send around the minutes of the last meeting at some point, if that would help.
Yeah, if you don't mind, if you could send them to either myself or Lorna, and she could distribute them. Thank you for that. Denise, anything on special education review?
Yes, so the committee met today, and we received, Elena, our consultant, did a deeper dive literature review of best practices on assessments for LD and gifted. She was looking at when is the best time to do them, how do we do them, some alternate assessments versus that kind of quantitative versus qualitative, and information on reliability, stability, usability, kind of all that sort of what are the best practices with that. So now the staff is going to, so we discussed that at the SPED review meeting, and now staff is going to take all that great information and look at our practices and figure out how they align. So, are we aligned with best practices, that sort of thing, and then come back to the Spec Ed review committee with their thoughts and what kind of, I guess, their recommendations or what they want to do going forward in terms of this assessment and screening assessment. It really gets a little tough because sometimes the words are used interchangeably, but looking at making sure that people are getting access to the right programming at the right time.
Good. Thank you, Denise. Equity and Inclusive Education Advisory Steering Committee. Rochelle, is that yours? Oh, sorry.
It's me, and I was unable to be there last time, so I'm going to look at my trustee friends who sometimes are at that meeting. And report for me. Thank you.
We talked about, they put out some quotes, and we got to exchange ideas between the two. And we also talked about ways to have equity kind of be infused. And so one of the things that one of the members talked about was the religious culture, values, and how there's different emphasis, different years. And so he hadn't seen it coming through. And Mary emphasized that last year they'd gone through social and culture values of the different ones. And this year they would be doing something else. So it wasn't that religion was being ignored. It was just, it was a cycle. So everything was a cycle. But one of the things that came out of that was the imam was talking about going to the synagogue on Saturday for the community memorial in Oakville. And so because of that being brought up and being shared amongst us, some of us actually ended up being able to go. And so again, that was another example of if you don't know what's happening, you don't know to go. So I noticed that, but I also can get you those minutes, so I will I'll do that as well. That's an example of the SEAC trustees aren't necessarily going to be the same trustees. So in this case, you have a SEAC rep on that committee, but the accessibility coordinating got changed, and I've never been able to come to a lot of the SEAC meetings because of another commitment as a trustee in my ward. So it's just occurred to me that is an issue in that it doesn't have a nice conduit. So that's probably one of those things where we'll put it in. Whoever is that rep on there should make a report to SEAC either through Mark or directly so that you know what's happening on that committee, because it may not be one of the 4 trustee reps for SEAC.
Normally we have a rep as well on SEAC, on the Accessibility Coordinating Committee, not just the SEAC.
I will say it's just very difficult. Like, I have a full-time job, and the meetings are at 10:30 on Thursdays. So I either have to take a full day off of work to be there. So I follow the minutes, and, and I did find, frankly, the 2 or 3 times that I did attend the meetings, they didn't seem very interested. I think I was there for show, they needed to have a representative there. That's sort of how I felt, that I raised some concerns specific to what I was aware of as a teacher and as a parent of a student that requires severe accessibility requirements. And they were sort of talking about how much it would cost to pave a parking lot. Like, it seemed like very small. I was a very small fish in a bigger pond of a huge budget that they had to allocate for renovating schools that were out of date, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just not sure SEAC's place on that committee other than figurehead, because I feel like the issues that we're discussing about accessibility in the classroom and accessibility like I'll give you a silly example, but my son is in a life skills class of a school it's Udinawi Public School, which is not 4 or 5 years old, and the buttons for the wheelchair aren't accessible from the door. So as he independently, supposedly, wheels up to it, there's no way they can reach to where one of the buttons. And I'm thinking, like, you just built this school, but sort of in a discussion at that meeting, it was very much like, that's small fries sort of thing. So I don't know if you feel the same way, Rochelle, or...
I think there is an importance of having somebody because, you know, we need some voice there. And even if it's just to figure out what's going on with the accessibility that's at the board level, I think that's still important for SEAC to know about.
The Student Senate has now sent a representative, so it may be the tone of the meetings may be changing a little. I've only been to a few because I only took over when Kim changed all her, you know, when she left. And we rearranged a lot of stuff at that same point. But I'm sorry that it's sad to hear that's the impression, because that's not the impression I got from listening, because I know it's not just the staff that are talking. And so the last couple of meetings I've been at, you know, things have come up, like somebody talking about, well, this, whatever. So, and it may just be that we need a few more outside voices than the staff. So maybe it's just a factor, but I'll take that back and see if I can think of a way to. But you're right, daytime meetings are a problem. And that's another reason why sometimes the trustees don't volunteer for a Tuesday night, because they're already out Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you know, like different things. So again, it's all a case of timing, but then the staff it's a staff committee that we sit on. So there's not much we can do about that, other than maybe making it 4 o'clock in the afternoon, whether that would help any.
Mark first. Go ahead, Mark.
If I could reiterate what Ann was saying, just around, you know, I really want a SEAC voice on that committee. And if you feel that your voice wasn't heard or valued, whether you take that back to, you know, to the chair, or whether I do, because your voice or a voice from this table is very important at that table. So however you want one of us to handle that.
I'm not suggesting they weren't friendly or kind or nice, or, I mean, everyone was very friendly. It just, in the room, a large part of the discussion involved the people in charge of, you know, building operations. It didn't, you know, I agree with you with the younger student, the high school student that joined the committee. I thought that was a very good meeting because everybody almost talked to him and I don't want to say talk down a little bit, but was talking in a way that was more inclusive. Whereas the first meeting I went to, I felt like I was a fly on the wall of a school committee, and this was like a random parent that needed to sit there. The fact that I'm a teacher allowed me to understand most of what they were talking about, but I would think the average person would have no idea what they were talking about in terms of, like, they were talking about tenders for this. And again, it was a large conversation about the paving of a parking lot and how they were going to get the school. Anyway, so I think the fact that a student was there really changed the dynamic. And I would agree with you that I think there just has to be some, if they really value us on that committee, I think they have to value the voice that we are parents of kids that are having these accessibility issues every day. And, you know, it's not up to the teachers to solve that problem. I mean, it was built that way and needs to be fixed.
So thanks for raising this. I think that because this group will do the same process in February, right? When this group is formed and we're selecting a chair and vice chair and committee reps. So in that process, then I'd like to do, you know, I appreciate hearing this, because then I'd like to have some conversation here about what is the role of a SEAC member on all of these committees, and I can touch base with my colleagues about, if you can appreciate this, how accessible are those meetings, right, in terms of language, you know, the topics, the et cetera, right? Even you know, the invitation for that dialogue about how do I fit here, right? What's my role here? Understanding that. So thanks for that. Well, I think that's a good topic for us to talk about in our first meeting in February.
Rochelle, you're still on the list. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I do appreciate what you said about how you felt attending those meetings. And I guess, as I said, it is a board initiated, so there's a lot of perspectives that are coming to the table. It's also a committee that only meets 3 or 4 times a year. So when they do meet, you know, they try to accomplish a lot of things. So that might be part of the problem, is if you miss a meeting, you know, you may feel that you've missed something and you're not quite in the loop anymore.
Thank you, Rochelle. Next is working together document. Can you speak to that, Mark? Because I know Sherry was on that, but I think she's done with that, right?
Yeah, I can speak to say that we've worked through a lot of the content. I think I talked last time about that there haven't been a lot of big changes, but that we're looking at the formatting, and that the format part, we're waiting for our media department, who does all the design work and all that in terms of making the design side. We know the content is important, but also how it's presented is important as well. So we've been patiently, I think we're getting a little impatient, but I know they have a big workload, waiting for them to be able to, you know, bring this to the top of the queue in terms of that work. You know, the current document that we have in schools and on our website is certainly very current. You know, the information hasn't changed in terms of our processes, the things, and it's still available to parents. But we want to get this revised document out there. So I can tell you that we're waiting for the media folks.
Good, thank you, Mark. Final report then is on the MMR LBP integration update. We did have our final meeting of that integration committee this afternoon. That meeting consisted of essentially just what you call in project management terms of lessons learned. And you look back at what worked well, what didn't work, how could we do things differently, and made a bunch of notes and suggestions about what went well and what needs to be taken into consideration when it comes time to move the kids from Bateman into Nelson and into Central, right? And everyone on the committee agreed it was a much bigger job, obviously, to move Bateman than it was to move Pearson. We talked about a lot of things. The highlights were basically that it went quite well. There was a lot of planning and work done, student-to-student interaction, teacher-to-teacher interaction. Claire Porteau, the principal at MMR, arranged tours for the students to come over, have a look, get familiar with the layout of the building, where everything's located, basic stuff like where your classrooms are going to be, where the washrooms are, how to find a cafeteria, that kind of thing. So it you know, by everyone's account, it went really well. There were no real major issues. And the majority of the students just came in and said, okay, it's a new building, no big deal, we're moving on, right? So it was not as disruptive as some people thought it might have been. There were some fights that broke out in the first couple of weeks. Turns out those are the same people that fought each other last year in their own schools. So the Pearson kids that got into fights at MMR, and the MMR kids that fought last year, they started fighting again too. But there was no fighting between the schools, and that's the good news for that one. So it was really good to see it went quite well. And I think one of the key things that worked and is going to be so important for the Bateman transition is they put together what they called Student Voice, where they gave students a lot of input into the process and structuring social activities and that kind of thing to help get the kids together. So it broke down a lot of those social barriers and, for lack of a gentler term, prejudice from one school to another, right? These kids are different. They're coming in. They're going to be weird. And then they all get together and they have a dance or whatever, and they find out, no, we're just as weird as they are. So it's, it's all the same, and it really doesn't cause a problem. So it was good to see it went well. And I think the only thing that came out of it that the students didn't like is they felt there were too many meetings to make sure that we were all talking and working together. So maybe a fewer student meetings or online versions of it or something like that. But overall, I got to say it was a great success. And, Superintendent Pennyfather and Superintendent Blackwell really did a bang-up job in getting all that done. So that's it for that. There is Mark spoke briefly about the next agenda. That will be, I'll be talking about, first we got all the machinations of getting SEAC restarted, and then presentation on mental health update.
Maybe I'll just remind everyone that we, if you don't have it in your calendar already, that we chose January the 29th as the new SEAC orientation. So I guess that's technically our first meeting of the new SEAC, but that Tuesday night. And this is one thing we didn't talk about in the reflection time is our Tuesday nights at 7:00 still the preferred. It's not carved in stone that we have to be Tuesdays. That is the first Tuesday of the month at 7 still the preferred time. I know it's kind of we've always done it at this time. People want it earlier in the evening or the change to another week of the month or just. Yeah, that was the intent was to have it on. I guess in light of that, we don't have a January meeting. That we needed to wait until the board meetings for the approval of the SEAC members, and not knowing if it would go to happen at the first meeting in January or at the second. So, which is the third week, the third one. So, in terms of timing, we could. The ministry guidelines say we should have 10 meetings a year. So, if we miss January, then we're going to be sort of pushed to double up at another time. So, and the orientation, it's well over an hour. In terms of content and questions and those kinds of things. So that's why we thought, because the third board meeting in January wouldn't be until the 22nd. So the 23rd. So there wouldn't potentially be the approval of the new SEAC until the 23rd, which means we really couldn't have our first meeting until the 29th, the following Tuesday. That's why we selected that. And I think that's what we did 4 years ago as well, if I recall. End of January orientation, and then the first formal meeting, the beginning of February. If folks don't want 2 weeks in a row, we could push later in February. Could go to maybe the second week if that's a preference. That's just the rationale to help you understand. So back to my question, do we want to stay with Tuesdays, the first Tuesday of the month, stay with 7:00? I'm seeing nods in general. Okay.
I know I've been doing it so long, I'm probably just going to show up here anyway. So take me a while to get used to it.
Some committees, as you said, some committees of the board meet during the day. I know in some boards, the actual board meets during the day, right? It's not an evening meeting of the Board of Trustees in some parts of the province. So there's nothing carved in stone that has to be an evening. I think that most of you work, is my understanding, and need this to be in the evening. But that's why I decided to ask. So, okay, thanks.
Okay, so last item then, or second to last, is just concluding remarks. I just wanted to take a minute to thank everyone for their time and effort and dedication to SEAC over this term. It's not an easy job, particularly those of you who are reps of associations. You've got your association duties and SEAC. Some of you probably have families involving perhaps spouses, children, maybe, and jobs. So it's a big challenge, right? And I appreciate the effort and dedication it takes to come out here and do the work and stick with it the way you have. So I do appreciate that very much. And hopefully, you haven't been scared off yet, and we'll see everybody back in January. So with that, oh yeah.
If I could say on behalf of the staff, how much we appreciate your input as well. Over the course of the 4 years, there have been many times at the back tables that you provided us input through our big topics. If we've done those, and you've provided us some great input. We have taken that back and acted on many of your suggestions, and your questions and comments to me here as well have been helpful. So you're often providing a perspective that we need to be reminded of, and that being the voice of the parent. And so I really appreciate you bringing that voice to us as well, because we're all in partnership in this work together. So really appreciate that, and I appreciate that this has very much been a collaborative place, that we have these conversations and do this work together. I think we recognize that we're better if we can have these conversations in that way. I talked to my colleagues, and some of the SEACs around the province work really well together, like I feel we do here. Some of them can be some challenging places. And so, I appreciate that, we've maintained that collaborative approach, and I look forward to working with you in the new year.
Thank you, Mark. And on that note, I raise the motion to adjourn, or raise the question. I can't remember the term anymore. First, second, Lou, all in favor of adjourning the meeting 10 minutes ahead of schedule? All right. Yeah. Any opposed? So carried. Thanks very much, everyone. Enjoy the holidays. I may be the first one to say it, and I know that's weird, but we won't see each other again for a while. So take care, and we'll see you in the new year.